I believe the meeting is now recording. So, all right, rough start, but I think we're good to go now. Hello, my name is Deirdra DiVittis. I'm the Region H Finance Chair. I joined the region staff in August of last year, so relatively a new APO volunteer. But I'm here to talk about the big F word, finance. For this presentation, I'm going to go over my background and establish some credibility because I know I'm new to this region. And then this presentation is basically Chapter Treasurer 101. And then I'll go over some advisor responsibilities and then some tools and resources that you all should have access to at the end. So a bit about me, I'm not going to read this whole slide, but I am from Pittsburgh. Actually, I graduated from Carleton University 4 years ago. I pledged APO in 2013 at the Alpha Gamma Upsilon chapter at Carleton, and I served on a bunch of different leadership roles within APO and other student organizations. I was also on the 2016 National Convention Chapter Finance and Operations Reference Committee. So a lot of experience in APO. My professional background is mostly in public accounting. I've done a whole bunch of different things from bookkeeping to some audit and assurance work to federal tax, and currently I work in indirect tax. So I know about all kinds of different taxes, and I've worked with small sole proprietors to large Fortune 100 firms. Right now I have a client that's a Fortune 20 firm, so it's one of the top 20 largest companies in the United States. And I've also have some nonprofit experience in the tax world as well. So I've got a pretty comprehensive background in the world of finance and accounting. So Chapter Treasurer 101. My goal for this is for it to not be quite so boring. I feel like a lot of these presentations I've been through with chapter treasurer stuff have been incredibly dry, and kind of with the subject material, it has to be dry. I'm hoping that maybe it won't be so dry. If you have any questions, I do have the chat open, so you can send messages in the chat or raise your hand. I'm going to try to pay attention to that. We'll get to it. So I wanted to start with the top 5 essential job functions of a chapter treasurer. So these are just the things from the National Office's Officer Guide that chapter treasurers are supposed to do. Hopefully none of these are shocking. So, you want to work with the advisor committee to track your funding and expenses, maintain transparency. So your advisory chair should have access to the chapter's bank account, as well as at least a couple other officers. Collecting dues, kind of obvious, right? And then maintaining good standing with the IRS. If your chapter has an IRS filing, not all of them do. And then tracking and collecting dues and depositing it into the chapter's account, not just holding onto the cash and potentially losing it. And I thought this was a really cool infographic that came from the Officer Guide. And these are just some traits that make for a really good chapter treasurer. So transparency is always good when we're talking about money. You want to be organized. Organization is massively important when you're doing anything with money. And I would say I've been working with the treasurers at OSU for I think 2 or 3 years now. And we went from having kind of this disorganized mess of just a bunch of stuff on a Google Drive to now they're in QuickBooks Online and have a really well-established way of documenting things and documented what that process is so that they can transition it from treasurer to treasurer. We're on the 3rd treasurer that I've worked with them. You want to be able to delegate stuff, right? And then problem solving. These are kind of not going to read everything to you, right? On that note about the IRS compliance, our chapters in APO generally fall into 3 different categories with how their budgets and their tax structure is. So one example, the chapter has its own tax ID number, or FEIN, which means they might have their own bank accounts, their own budget, and they have to file 990 and potentially other tax filing requirements. So in Ohio, there's a state nonprofit filing through the Attorney General's office that our chapters who have their own FEIN should be filing. They're required to. OSU files it. The second is the chapter is fully rolled under the university budget. So their bank account is managed by the university. Their budget falls through the university, and the chapter does not have a separate FEIN. My alma mater chapter was structured that way, and it was really nice because we kind of didn't have to stress too much about it, and everything was pretty low risk because there were a lot of other people paying attention to what we were doing, and we had to get approval from the university to spend any money. So we didn't have to develop those controls. The university already had them for us. And then there's potentially a hybrid budget that's some combination of the two. So maybe the chapter has their own FEIN, and maybe they have a separate bank account off campus, but maybe they get some university funds too. So all of these have different implications and things to consider for chapter treasurer. I'm going to try to touch on each of these. The, I guess, biggest thing the treasurers do is manage the budget, right? So how do we build a budget? Well, whenever you want to build a budget, the chapter treasurer should consult with their officers and any committee chairs to figure out what they need and build that budget based on, this is what we spent last year, this is what we're going to do in the future. The chapter should vote on the budget, even if it has to go through student government and get voted on there too. So my home chapter, we had to get approval from student government for our budget every year, but our chapter had to vote on it first, and the chapter should always vote on the budget. If you have to change the budget, like let's say in the beginning of the semester, you budgeted for an event and you went way under budget and you want to reallocate that money to do something else with it, you need to have the chapter vote on amending the budget to make that change so that you can use that money for something else. And this is super helpful. This is a schedule of fees. So this is the pledges or the dues that each kind of student needs to pay to the national office. Obviously your chapters might be higher, but that's what's going to the national office. So I thought I'd throw that in here too, with the due dates. It's pretty nice. Some tips for budgeting, requesting specific information. So if you have your rush committee chair is like, I need $700 for rush, and you're like, that's kind of a lot of money. What do you need that for? Ask them to be more specific, break it down like into each event. So, okay, we're going to do a taco night. That was something my chapter did. Every rush week, we had at least 1 or 2 taco nights. So we would just have like a DIY taco bar and we just kind of chill out and have a meet or greet. That was probably our most successful rush event that we did. You know, maybe that's one of your events. So all of your supplies are taco making supplies, but then maybe you have a rush event that's making something like taking plastic bags and making mats for the homeless for them. You know, breaking up the expenses for each of those is better than just, this is what we need for this program. If you don't know how much something costs, research it. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but when I was in college, I was student government treasurer for a term, and I was the one reviewing all of the budgets for all of the student organizations. And I noticed all the time, some really big student organizations would just roll over their budget to the next year and not research the price. So something changed drastically, like the cost of transportation. They had budgeted bus ticket prices and hadn't updated those ticket prices since I think like 20 years earlier. So those things change. So even if that's what it was in your budget the last year, prices change, make sure that your prices are current. And then do a budget versus actual comparison. So compare, this is what our budget was for this past year, and this is what we actually spent. Did you go over, under budget? Why was your actual activity different than what your budget was? You know, did you have a lot more pledges and you had a lot more income, or did you go way over budget and not have as many pledges as you expected? And then, you know, paying attention to those really large events that you might do is always something to put a lot more energy into. And make sure you maintain transparency. Your members will definitely appreciate it. Nobody likes to feel like they're in the dark about anything. And make sure you're reconciling your accounts. So make sure you go through, and does your account balance make sense? Does it match all of the deposits and expenses that you've made? I thought this was a really nice quote. Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. And let me tell you, I have a client who's a very large publicly traded corporation that they're completely not compliant with the business licenses in the state of West Virginia, because they thought those are relatively low cost, and we'll just, you know, if we get audited for one of them, we'll pay it. They're like $50 a year. Not a huge expense, right? Well, they got audited by 60 cities in 2020. So it did turn out to be a pretty large expense, right? So pay attention to those little things because they do add up. 990 reporting. This is probably the most daunting thing to the chapter treasurers who have a 990 that they have to file. There's 3 different 990 forms. The 2 most common ones, there's the full form, and then there's the postcard form. If you're under $50,000 of gross receipts every year, you file the postcard form. It's really easy, really quick, not something we're stressing out over. It's basically a bunch of yes or no questions. You check the box saying our gross receipts were under 50,000, and you file it. Super simple and quick. If you're over $50,000 of gross receipts in a single year, that doesn't mean you have to file the full form. It's actually based on a 3-year average of gross receipts. So this is something we're dealing with at Alpha Iota at OSU. They're like teetering right on that border of 50,000. So we're kind of anticipating, you know, they hit over 50,000 in 2019, and they were under 20,000 in 2020. So for 2021, if they go over 50,000, they might average for those 3 years over 50,000, just as an example. So just because you hit over 50,000 in 1 year doesn't mean you have to file the full form. The full form is a nightmare if you have never seen like a big tax form before. And if you are in that situation where you think you need it, like, please reach out to me. I will definitely help any chapter figure out whether or not they actually need to file the full form and how to file it. This is where having that organization and documenting everything, having all of your receipts, documenting all of your income really come into play, because with the full form, it's not just, oh, we made $51,000. You have to break out all of your expenses. You have to list all of your officers. There's a couple pages of questions you have to answer, and it's a lot more daunting and time consuming than the postcard form. So if you think that you might need to file it, reach out to me or some other tax professional before you go and file it, because they are a bigger deal than the postcard form. We're recommending, we being region staff, we're recommending the chapters who are getting close to that 50,000 threshold implement something like QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online is an awesome program, and Alpha Iota at OSU has had a lot of success using it, and they've had a lot of success doing officer transition with that program. I've been helping them, you know, from step one. I'm sure having, you know, someone in an advisory kind of role helping them through the whole process year over year has probably helped, but At this point, I'm kind of hands off, and I meet with them like twice a semester to go over things. So they're doing it on their own and having a lot of success with it. So it's something to think about. And we do in our video library have a webinar I did in the fall on the decision to use something like QuickBooks Online. So that's something to check out if you think your chapter falls into that category of maybe this would be a good idea. Something to note about gross receipts. Any income, any cash the chapter touches is gross receipts. So money you get from the university, that's gross receipts. If you have, you know, a fundraiser where you're just collecting change, because I know like a lot of, that was something that we did a lot at my university, was have different fundraisers where, you know, maybe each floor of the residence hall had a can they would put change into, and then it was a competition to see who could raise the most and spare change. Every single penny you collect on a fundraiser like that is included in gross receipts, even if your chapter isn't using that money. If it's, hey, we did a fundraiser at Chipotle and we're giving all of that money to the American Cancer Society, the check Chipotle writes your chapter, it should be included in gross receipts. Even on the situation where you're going to turn around and write a check to the American Cancer Society for that amount. If it's money that your chapter made or received in any kind of way, it's gross receipts. So I know that's kind of something people get confused about, but if your chapter touched the money, it's gross receipts. There's some other tax implications to think about. I know a lot of times we think, oh, nonprofits don't have to worry about taxes, but you still sometimes have to file tax forms. So in some states, if you have an FEIN and if your chapter has an FEIN, you might have to register with the Secretary of State or some other comparable office. In Ohio, our chapter should be registered with the Attorney General's office and file the annual charitable registration. There's some implications for chapters in Texas, and I'm sure we probably don't have anybody from Texas, but I know we have chapters that are registered for franchise tax. It doesn't mean that they're paying tax, but they might have to have that registration based on the state's rules. There's also different city and county rules depending on where you're at. And all of our chapters hopefully are doing everything right, and you can just file the same forms that you filed last year. If you think that there's something that you should be doing that you're not, or maybe something that you are filing that you don't think you should be, like I'm totally down to help you figure that out. So please reach out to me. And again, even though I'm in Ohio now, I work with stuff all across the United States and even some international stuff. So definitely a great resource for you guys. That's kind of all I put together for Chapter Treasurer 101. I know I've got a lot of information I'm throwing at you, so if you have questions, please let me know. I do want to talk about advisor responsibilities. I think it's important for students and advisors alike to understand what advisors should be doing. So I've pulled things from the National Office's Advisor Handbook and the Treasurer Officer Guide to kind of put this piece together. So this is from the National Office. According to the Treasurer Officer Guide, chapter officers should have access to the bank accounts. At least one advisor should. They should access any documentation of the tax returns, which the 990 form is a tax return. Any attorney general filings, anything like that. Advisors should be involved in the budget building process. So that doesn't mean the advisor should be writing the budget. It just means, you know, the treasurer should be working with the advisor, and the advisors should be paying attention to what's going on with building the budget. You know, did the treasurer just copy the budget from last year and that's all they did? They didn't really put any work into it. Like, that's something the advisor should be paying attention to and looking out for. The next big thing, advisors should be participating in financial review of chapter financial activities. I know this is kind of what does this mean question, and a lot of people maybe don't understand what that means. And I'm working with BJ, our region advisor chair. Hopefully sometime in the next like 2 months, we're going to put something together for advisors on how to do this chapter financial review. And I'll be presenting on this is what that means, what it should look like, how to do that process. So if you're a chapter advisor, or if you have chapter advisors that aren't doing your financial review, put that bug in their ear, like, hey, look out, be on the lookout for this invite to this this workshop, because I think that's going to be very beneficial to all of our chapters. And then campus advisors should be assisting with any funding received through the university. They might have to sign off on something depending on the campus rules, and helping navigate that process. That's what the campus advisors are for, right? To navigate the campus policies. Advisors can also help advise on how to document and store financial records. And this is huge for officer transition. So think about the situation at OSU where they're teetering on the edge of having to file the full 990 form. That's we're looking at a 3-year average for their gross receipts. So you need to have those documentations, because a chapter treasurer is not going to be the treasurer of 3 years in a row. I'd be really surprised if we had any chapters that had a treasurer that was the same 3 years in a row. And they can also help with any kind of grant application. So there are APO grants like the youth service grant that we can apply through our national office for. You can also go outside of APO to get grants too. And that's something that advisors could be a massive resource for and helping them get those. If the advisors aren't sure that they're capable of doing the financial review on chapters activities, they can find someone else to do that. So that could be somebody else from campus, like somebody from the student activities office. It could be a faculty member. It could be a local CPA that they know. It could be another alumni volunteer. It doesn't have to be the advisory chair, but it should be somebody that's appointed by the advisory chair. And this is like a little blurb in one of the national officer guides. But that is something to kind of be aware of. So if your advisors are all like, I'm scared to do that, they can appoint somebody else to do it, but it can't be another student. And then this, I thought this is kind of a nice thing to add. Sometimes it's not about the money, but rather the process of managing the money. So no matter how big or small your chapter's budget is, how much money you're taking in, and how much money you touch, the process should all kind of be the same, right? Like you should have an organized process for how you reimburse brothers, for where you store receipts, how you manage your bank account, all of those things, no matter how big your chapter is. And then I have some tools and resources I put together for you guys. So there are tools that you can use. Obviously, Excel and Google Sheets are great for simple budgets. If you're operating on a budget through the university, that's probably more than adequate. You know, my home chapter, I think our budget was less than $3,000 a year. And we used Google Sheets and we had a lot of success with that. On the flip side, that wasn't working for Alpha Iota. So they, you know, upgraded to QuickBooks Online. There are other resources out there that are similar to QuickBooks that can do similar things. So I'm a fan of QuickBooks, but there's other things out there too. And there's a cost associated with that. I think our region's QuickBooks Online is $70 a month. So for some chapters, that might be a lot. So it's also something to consider. I definitely don't think every chapter needs to be in QuickBooks, but the big ones should definitely be considering that. If your chapter receives funds from the university, they might have to use a specific budget form. They might have to use specific templates for reimbursements, any of those types of things. So definitely work with your university and find out what campus resources you have. There's also, the National Treasurer Officer Guide, and we have a bunch of stuff linked on our Region H site and also on APO.org. Our Region H site has links to a lot of the national resources, but we also have some other stuff that we've put together. And then I'm a resource for you guys too. So don't hesitate to reach out to me at all. The Treasurer Officer Guide from the National Office does have a chapter budget worksheet. And I think you don't necessarily need to use this as a template, but I think that this, if you don't have any kind of established process already, this is great to look at. And these screenshots are kind of blurry, but look at every kind of revenue stream that you have and figure out how many, for pledge fees, it's the same number, how many pledges you have, that's how you figure out the amount. I know some of this might be obvious, but looking through these worksheets, it's definitely a helpful exercise. And when you look at something like what the National Office put out, it might make you realize, oh, we forgot to account for that thing. We forgot to account for, this type of expense. And this is the expense side of it. I like how this breaks out. Most chapters are going to have stuff that fits in each of these categories. So it's pretty comprehensive. And if you don't have something established that's working well for you, this is a great place to start. And that's all I've got. I know I kind of rushed through that kind of quickly, but I wanted to make sure I left room for questions if there are any. So does anybody have any questions? Everybody's just excited about getting some time back, I guess. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. Right now the only students I'm really working with are the treasurer at Alpha Iota, but I would love to work with more students. And if you're feeling like you're lost, if you feel like your advisors don't know how to help you, please reach out to me, because I want to see everybody in our region succeed for sure.
And Deirdra, I'll just echo you there. Having worked with you this semester, you really know your stuff. And to the students sitting in, Deirdra can probably do all this in her sleep. Like, this is second nature. So it's not lip service. Definitely take advantage of the opportunity and reach out with anything, because I don't know anything about finance, and everything I know I learned from her. So definitely use her.
Actually,
I have a question, Deirdra. Even though I'm definitely not Region H, I've been an advisor for my chapter for like decades, and there was stuff in here that I didn't know, which is embarrassing for me, but good on you. Is this presentation available like on the Region H website or something? Because there's a number of things in there that I'd love to review.
The recording will be made available. I'll get we can definitely make the presentation, post that on there too. And I could email it to you, because I have your email from the
Excellent
last session too.
That would be great as well. No, there's a number of things there that, like I said, after all the years as an advisor, I wasn't as aware of as I needed to be. So I'm going to steal, giving you full credit, but my University of Michigan students may not appreciate me stealing stuff that's being used at Ohio State, but I don't care. Thank you. Really good.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate that. And it's, I mean, you said there's things that you don't know about, and I think that's just a common thing that plagues the kind of accounting finance world, is people forget about it. Sorry, I'm my cats are losing their minds this morning. The I work with some really big companies, and the example I used about my client that has a bunch of cities in West Virginia that are going after them for taxes. They're like, we didn't know. We thought we only had, the situation in like 2 of these places, and it's like the whole state. And I mean, they have, I think, 3 or 4 manufacturing facilities in that state, and it's like, what do you? And there's places that they had facilities that they don't have, the proper licensing in, and the tax director who manages a $15 million budget is like, I don't know. So, I think there's just so many different things to consider with a lot of this that, it does change every so many years. Rules get updated, and the way things work changes. So it's, definitely overwhelming to a lot of different people. So, but, okay, if there's no more questions, I think we'll break a little bit early, if that's okay with you guys. All right. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody.
You too. Thank you.